Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to this small webinar about Biamp control systems. We're going to be going through a very basic introduction into the Biamp control infrastructure that we have today. To introduce myself, my name is Ian Hodgkinson. I'm an application engineer for Biamp and I'm located in the United Kingdom. So I get involved in tech support, pre-sales designs, and application engineering in general. So today in the Biamp Control webinar, we're going to be going through a number of subjects. Firstly, the target markets, a simple introduction to the control products that we have, the hardware, configuration and devices, the supported topologies for these products, and then also just touching on how we can integrate with UC control systems that are out there on the market. So firstly, the target markets. Conference rooms, of course, is a big business for us. Presentation rooms, auditoria, education, houses of worship, hospitality and corporate collaboration spaces. So all of those are target markets for our control products, along with our other audio products in general. But pretty much anywhere where you need control of third-party products, we can help you out with those. So a little bit about the control. It's very simple to use, stylish, intuitive interfaces, thousands of devices or device drivers readily available to be used off the shelf. Simple to install, so none of the products you'll see are rack mountable, so they are compact in design, so they're easy to hide away in behind a rack or behind a display or anywhere that you need them really. Simple to configure. We have one piece of software called Project Designer, which is where you load in the controllers you want to use and then also the products you want to control. And then you integrate those in terms of how the functions or the functionality will interface with the user controls that you also give. If by chance we don't have the driver for a product you're trying to use or control, we have another piece of software called Device Editor, which allows you to make your own drivers to be used inside Project Designer. So long as you know the API for the product, it's a simple task to make your own driver and add it into your own personal library of products. Simple to power and connect. So most of the products, all the products we're going to talk about, no, not all, one doesn't. So most of the products use PoE power, so it becomes much easier to integrate rather than having local power supplies for wall panels, for example, which is always quite tricky to accomplish. But it's also simple to expand. So we have an expansion device here, or the products can be used across a network so that you can put the controls or the control interfaces where you need them in a building, close to the elements being controlled, and then connect them up over Ethernet, for example, on a network structure. So simple to add control ports. So let's take a look at the hardware. So we have, for those who don't know, these control products came via an acquisition of a company called Neats in Denmark a couple of years ago. So we've completely integrated those products into the Biamp infrastructure now. So they've all been rebadged as Biamp. Some new products have been added and some have been taken away from the Neats product line. So what we have here is indication of exactly what products we have available right now and the target ways of using them. So these are the 5 areas we're going to cover today. So firstly, the Impera control pads. The first one is the simplest product we have called Echo. So Impera is the product family, Echo is the product name in this case. So this is a control pad with a number of buttons on it, 8 buttons with 2 color LEDs, giving you a real tactile user interface. So if your customer is not into touch panels for any reason or simply doesn't need touch panels, these can be used. They're wall mountable, 3 different form factors to fit into EU, Denmark and US wall boxes. In terms of control, they have one bidirectional RS-232 port, one unidirectional RS-232 port, 3 GPIO ports, and one of the RS-232 ports can be given over to IR control. So this product is DC powered, so it does need a DC voltage from a wall wart or local transformer. The Echo Plus, the big brother of the Echo, is very similar, looks exactly the same from the front side. controls exactly the same number of products or the same ports. Again, is DC powered, but it also has the addition of a LAN port, so it can control up to 2 LAN devices directly from the device. But note that this product is not PoE powered, so this is the one that I was referring to earlier, not PoE powered, so you must always have a DC power supply connected to the Echo Plus. From here on, everything we will talk about today is PoE powered. So the first one is a uniform, so quite a new product in the range. Control pad with 8 buttons again, but interestingly, it's got an e-ink display, which allows you as an installer to change the graphics which is on display, whereas on the Echo and the Echo Plus, they actually had a piece of paper which you needed to print. So most integrators don't carry a printer around with them. So the e-ink display is a great solution because it doesn't need to be changed very often in terms of the graphics that's on there, but you can make the graphics on site during the installation of the project. And the e-ink display means that it's very long lasting and does not take too much power from the PoE supply. In terms of control, very similar to the Echo, so control of 2 LAN devices, 2 unidirectional RS-232, one of which can be given over to IR, and then 3 GPO power ports. And again, fits the standard EU, Danish, and US back boxes. Then we're going to move on to the touch panel controllers. So at the moment, we have one product in the range called Tango. So this really is the workhorse of the range at the moment. So this is a controller, it's about half rack unit, but easily mountable behind a display or in a rack, for example. Now this one can control up to 10 LAN devices, also has 3 bidirectional RS-232 ports and 2 unidirectional. Again, one of the RS-232 ports can be given over to IR, I do beg your pardon. And then we also have 8 GPI ports and 4 assignable relay contacts, which can be used for controlling external equipment like screens and display on off, for example. You can also add 8 Impera peripherals onto this expander devices. And as I mentioned before, this is also PoE powered. So these are real workhorses and will become a mainstay of your control integrations going forward. Then we have the touch panels themselves. So these can be used along with the Tango, for example. So we have 3 in the range, the Touch 4, which is a 4-inch portrait-only touch panel, only wall mountable, so no desk mount option for this one. But it has a capacitive touch LCD, ambient light sensors, and again is PoE powered, so wall mountable into pretty much any wall box. Then we have the Touch 7, the next step up, but landscape only. So this one is wall mountable again, but does have the option of a table mount, as you can see on the display on the image there. It's got a wall mount option, table mount option as well. Again, ambient light sensors and capacitive touch, PoE powered. And then the big boy of the range, the Touch 10, wall mountable, optional table mount, capacitive touch LCD, PoE powered, and ambient light sensors. Now, these touch panels, what they do, they don't have a controller built in, but basically what they are used for is to show and interface with a web application which is hosted inside the controller, like a Tango or a Touch 8i, for example. So these don't have any controller capabilities, but you can use them to point towards a web app in one of the controllers that we have in the range. But more about those a bit later on. Then we have the Apprimo Touch 8i, which is quite a new product in our range, but an excellent addition. So this one, as you can see, is an 8-inch touch panel controller. The I in the name Touch 8i means Impera inside, which means it has an Impera controller integrated inside the unit. So this means it can control up to 20 LAN devices. It does have a table mount included, as you can see in that image, but it is also wall mountable standard. So this one is straight out of the box with table mount and wall mounting. Capacitive touch proximity sensor, but it also has an ambient light sensor in this case. Then lastly, in the peripheral section, we have one product at the moment. This is called the ConnectX MP6. So this is an extender for the Impera controllers, so the Tango or the Touch 8i, and it allows the addition of a single RS-232 bidirectional port or a unidirectional RS-232 port or two unidirectional RS-232 ports. But then also one of those ports can be given over to infrared, also 3 GPIO ports, and control for 2 LAN devices. So this is a great addition to either of the controllers that we've got at the moment. PoE powered, which means you can locate it directly in the place or in the area where you need to control devices. And you can connect up to 8 of these to each Impera controller. So moving on a little bit to the configuration and drivers. So the software that you use to configure your system and to get everything working in the way you desire is called Project Designer. So this is a real simple, intuitive software. And this is where you have the 7,000 device drivers included. So I was planning to have a live demo of how to do this today, but my earlier presentation had some technical issues. So I've rejigged this a little bit to take you through how to make a very simple design. So what I'm going to do is show you how to configure a Tango along with the touch panel in Project Designer and how to make that work. Now, it is very simplistic, and I've taken the main steps here to show you how to do this. And it's a very simple project, which is just controlling 2 presets within a Tessera. So take it as it is as an example. You can obviously make it more complex than this in real life. But for the purposes of this, it just shows you the main steps that you need to take to get a working project. So once you've installed Project Designer, it will automatically load with all of the current device drivers built into it. If at any time we update the drivers or add drivers to the library, you will get a notification that those are have been updated, and you are asked to, if you want to accept those updates. So once the software is installed, you select File New. You'll see this new project page where you can select which of the controllers you want to be using or keypads you want to be using. So in this case, I'm using a Tango. So if I double click on a Tango, it will automatically open a new project for Tango with a blank interface and design in it. So this is how it looks in the software. So in the software, you've got some key areas. For example, on the left-hand side here is a list of all of your devices. The tabs at the bottom, system, interface, function, and feedback, are the 4 main tabs which you use to set up your project. But this area here for the device drivers is very important here. So firstly, we're going to start on the system tab, and you can see in the main body of the screen here, we've got a representation of our Tango already in place there. So now what I can do is use the devices window on the left-hand side to find the devices that I need to add to my project. You can use the search function for the name of the product or the brand of the product. You can also use filters and change the way that the drivers are displayed. So whether it's by product type or manufacturer and so on. But I tend to use the search by name at the top there. You can also have your favorites at the top, so the things you use all the time. So I have all the Biamp ones here at the top, easily accessible for me all the time. So once I've found the product that I want to integrate or add into this project, I simply find it in the list of drivers on the left-hand side and drag it into my project area here, or your connection diagram. You can either drop it directly onto the required port on the controller, so the LAN port in this case for a Tessera Forte, or if you drop it onto the main body of the screen, it will automatically connect it to the correct port. So you can see here I've added a Tessera Forte X400, and it's using a LAN connection between the two here. Now, in the case of the Tessera, because it's a totally programmable device, you have to give the Project Designer software some indication of what you're trying to control inside Tessera. So here you can give it preset names, for example, or the instance IDs of the levels and the mutes that you need in your project. So you go ahead and run this wizard, or the wizard will automatically run, and you can set the presets and the levels inside there of what you want to control inside Tessera. And also just as a reminder to enable Telnet in Tessera, because that's the way that this product communicates with Tessera over Ethernet. So here I've got my Tessera added into my project, being controlled from a Tango. One thing I do need to do at this point is set the IP address of the Tessera. So obviously you can find that in the Tessera software itself. So I set the IP address, leave the port number as 23, which is the Telnet port. When you select the Tango, so you simply click on the Tango in the Project Designer software, you then need to set the required IP address of the Tango on your network, or I tend to leave these at the HCP and then reserve it inside my router, for example. So that's another way of doing this, but you do need to set the IP address of the Tango or the controller. So that's the very simple hardware setup or the configuration of the devices that we're going to be using. Now what I want to do is build my user interface. So if I click across to this interface tab here, you can see a blank screen. I'm on interface for this home page here, which is a web GUI style interface. So this is going to serve up a web page to the touch panel controllers or the touch panels that I want to use this design. So my interface here, first thing I can do is, as required, drag in a background here. So I've dragged in this background, or I can click here and change it to a background image. So you've got an image you like to use in your designs, in your touch panels, you can add those in here, or it could be a corporate logo, for example, for the end client. Then I can start building my interface in terms of the controls I want. Now, in this case, it's very, very simple because I just have two buttons recalling two presets. Now, it's unlikely to be a final project that you're going to make, but it gets across the idea of how simple this is to build a user interface. So I've added a couple of buttons in here. Then what I do is I select the first button and I use the controls here for adjusting the button text. So I can type in the text here. I can change the size of the text, the font being used, and so on, and the justification, etc. Also, what I've done is, in this case, because we only have one state, which is to recall a preset, I've deleted the state 2. You'll see on the next page in a moment. But you can have different text on two different states of a button, for example. Now that I've made my very simple user interface here, just with two buttons and a color background, I'm going to start adding the functions that I want these buttons to adopt. So to do this, I come across into the Functions tab of Project Designer. Then on the left-hand side, you can see all of the sequences which are related to the product which I selected in the System tab. So I just had a Tessera Forte X400 with two presets and some level controls. Obviously, if you have multiple products here, like a display or a metric switcher, they will all appear in here at the same time, and you can just select which function you want on which button, or you can have multiple functions on one button, of course. So you could change the audio routing and change the video routing at the same time on one button. Very simple. But in my case, I've got a sequence here. I simply drag the sequence that I want onto the button. So in my case, I'm recalling a preset. Now, in the case of Tessera, when I do that, it asks me which preset within Tessera I want to add to this button. So I simply type in the preset or one of the two presets that I preloaded in that wizard at the beginning. Once I've assigned all the functions to the buttons that I've got in my design, I then upload it. So I press the upload button. So this is where the project gets transferred from the Project Designer software into the hardware connected to our network in this case. You will then be asked if you want to use LAN. So some products can use USB, some products can use LAN, or some can use both. I predominantly use LAN nowadays, but some people prefer, for a completely standalone project, just to use the USB. So in my case, I've selected LAN, or it auto-selected LAN because it only has that connection. Then when I press start, it asks me or gives me a list of all of the products that it's discovered on my network. So you can see here on my network, I've got a Uniform, a Touch 8i, and a Tango. Now my project, I started off using it as a Tango, so I need to select the Tango here, and it gives me the IP address there, which is important for in a moment. Here it also gives me the serial number and the firmware revision of the product. So in my case, I select the Tango and I press start. It then starts the upload of the project into the Tango itself. So this obviously takes a few minutes to upload, depending on the size of the graphics and the number of buttons and so on that you've got in there, but the whole thing gets transferred up into the Tango. And then once it's finished, it gives you an indication of done. So now what we need to do is program or configure the touch panel so that it will find the user interface inside Tango. So this is how the touch panel looks on first running. So it has this welcome to Impera touch panel. You will find at the bottom edge of the touch panel there is a small hole behind which is a button. So this is commonly known as the pinhole settings button. So when you press that with the provided SIM card remover pin, or it could be a paper clip or a small screwdriver, it will go into the settings menu of the touch panel itself. So once you get there, the main display at the top, this is the main adjustments you have to make. So the first thing you have to do is use the touch panel to set the control system address. So this is the address that we discovered earlier on. In our case, I think it was 192.168.0.178, something like that. So we go into this menu, set the IP address of the control system. So this is telling the touch panel where to find its user interface to display and interact with. So once I've done that, obviously that's on a slightly different screen. You set the IP address, then when you come back here and you press the connect to control system. So now you're instructing the touch panel to initiate a connection to the controller. At that point, it checks that the controller is there and valid. And if so, it downloads the user interface into the touch panel and displays it. So at that point, you are up and running on your touch panel and you see the user interface that you designed. Now, another great way of testing and another feature actually is bear in mind that this Tango is serving a web page to any type of browser or touch panel that cares to interface with it. So yes, you can use our touch panels, which are convenient because they can be wall mounted. They're designed for to always be on and they're PoE powered. But you can, of course, use a web browser on a PC. And this is a great test. So when you call into support and you're having some problems finding the web page with a Touch 8i or a Touch 7, for example, what we will ask you to do often is to open up your laptop browser and see if you can find the web pages in a browser. So this works wonderfully. The other thing you can also do if you have a customer who would like to control their system from a smartphone, we also have the Neats Control app, which is available on the iOS store and on the Android Play Store. So you can download that. Again, you have to configure it to have the correct IP address of the controller. But once that's set up, then that gives you a user interface on a smartphone or an iPad or a tablet of any sort. So hopefully that was useful. Obviously very simplistic, but gives you a real easy step-by-step way of getting from a start of a project to finalization and getting it working inside multiple control interfaces. Right, that said, what I thought it would be useful to do is to show you some of the supported topologies of our products. Because we've got these components, you can use them in all sorts of different ways according to the requirements of the end user in terms of what touch panels they want, what keypads they want, and what products need to be controlled. So this is a very simple one. I've used the Echo Plus. So this obviously has an RS-232 port, and it has a LAN port on it. So this means you can directly control a LAN device. I've used a Tessera here, but it could of course be a different LAN device from our library or making a new device with device editor. And then of course I can control an RS-232 device. So very, very simple. You can assign functions to these buttons to change presets in the Tessera or control the LAN device as required, and to turn on and off the display in this case, or to change its source between HDMI and VGA sources. So Very simplistic, very easy to get up and running, but gives the end user a great user interface, which they can't go wrong with. So it really makes it simple for the end user. So this is how that will look inside Project Designer. So you can see the representation of the Echo Plus, the display that I chose here, a BenQ1, and then the Forte X, but it could of course be any audio processor or any processor in our libraries. Next step up is a uniform, exactly the same way. And of course, I've only used these devices as examples. The uniform, as we said, can have 2 LAN devices and multiple RS-232 devices, but I've just kept it simple with one of each here to get the point across to you. But a uniform, again, can be configured with the user interface that you need using those 8 buttons, and then controlling the devices. And this is how it appears in Project Designer. So a uniform controlling a display and a Forte X. Now, more like the project that we just worked on in the previous slides, we've got a Tango here, which is controlling a LAN device and controlling an RS-232 device. And this is serving a web page up to a Touch 7. So the Touch 7 is being given this user interface from the Tango. When you use the Touch 7, it initiates commands, for example, to recall presets in the Tsira or to send commands to the display to turn on and off or change source. So next step up in complexity, but just still a simple touch panel controlling the Tango. And this is how that one looks. Now, note that we have a touch panel in this system, but it doesn't appear anywhere in our Project Designer. And that's by design, because the Tango has up to 5 web interfaces built in. And that means there's 5 web pages which can be selected by any of the touch panels. So you could have multiple touch panels looking at interface 1 inside the Tango, and multiple touch panels or iPhone apps, or smartphone apps, I should say, and tablets looking at the same interface inside the Tango. So you will never see the devices like touch panels or the app or a tablet, for example, inside Project Designer, because they are just looking at a web page which is built in as an interface into the controller. But you do, of course, see the devices being controlled. So in this case, a display and a DSP. So the next step up is in complexity is a Tango, and this is serving a web page to a Touch 8i, which again, the combination is controlling a LAN device. Now with the Touch 8i, because it is a touch panel with a controller, when you put that into Project Designer, it does appear. So the Touch 8i does appear as a LAN device. Now in this case, of course, the Tango can control up to 10 devices, LAN devices. But the Touch 8i can also program or control up to 20 LAN devices. So here you've got an enormous capacity for controlling 30 devices between them. And you can share the responsibilities of those between the controllers, the Touch 8i and the Tango, plus have the touch panel control system as required, plus the interfaces on touch panels or web apps, for example. Then a simple one, the Touch 8i controlling 2 LAN devices here. Of course, it can go up to 20, but just to keep it simple, we have that here. Now, if we have a Touch 8i, but we want to control 1 LAN device, so that's how that appears in Project Designer. Here I've added the MP6 so that I can add an RS-232 device to a simple Touch 8i. So that's really cost effective. You get a processor and a touch panel built in one on the Touch 8i, controlling the LAN device directly, but controlling the RS-232 device via the MP6 as an add-on. And this is how that appears in Project Designer. So you can see we've got the Touch 8i controlling a Forte X and an MP6, which is then controlling the display with RS-232. So as I mentioned, the Tango has the capability of serving up to 5 web interfaces, or interfaces as they're called in Project Designer. So here I've got a Tango with what could be, for example, 5 touch panels in 5 different rooms. So each user interface will be different. Again, for simplicity, I've just kept it as 2 devices being controlled, a LAN device and an RS-232 device, but it could be multiple LAN devices and multiple RS-232 devices, depending on what products are in each of the rooms. So it could, for example, be 5 RS-232 displays, 1 for each room. and then a Tessera, which is being shared across the 5 rooms for background audio, for example. Now in here, the way I program this is inside the Tango, inside Project Designer, I actually program or select 5 different control interfaces. So these are homepage, interface 2, interface 3, and you can see on the right-hand side here which interface this is. So inside your touch panels, you firstly select the IP address of the controller, the Tango in this case, but you then also select in a submenu which interface number you will be looking at from that touch panel. So this is going to be 1 through 5. So in that way, you can have 5 different touch panels, all looking at different user interfaces, but all hosted on one Tango. So that's really smart. So you've got one simple controller, 5 different user interfaces on 5 different touch panels, and then controlling multiple devices all from there. So hopefully that gives you an explanation of how a multi-room system can be accommodated with a simple Tango in here. And that's how that will look inside this project. As I said, you don't see the interfaces in Project Designer, they just exist in the Tango, but you do see the devices that are being controlled. Of course, you can mix and match your control user interfaces. So we've got a Tango, which is serving a user interface to a touch panel here, but then we've also got some keypads or control pads here, which are programmed to control the external devices accordingly. So you could have these all in one room. They could be in 3 different rooms, depending on what the room function is, and you can choose the correct user interface for each room. And this is how that appears in Project Designer. So the Tango with the display and the Tessera being controlled directly, and then the Uniform and the Echo Plus added as expander devices here. Now, note the Tango can control up to 10 LAN products. So in this case, it's controlling 1 Forte, but also note that the Uniform and the Echo Plus, whilst connected to the LAN, they don't take up products that can be controlled. So that because they are our own products, we communicate with them directly, and they don't remove the capabilities of controlling external equipment. So in this case, you've got some really significant control possibilities. So you've got the 10 LAN products here, plus 2 more here, plus 2 more here. Then you've got 4 RS-232 ports here, 3 here, and 2 here. So you've got an awful lot of control capabilities here, plus the 3 different user interfaces that you need or would like in these 3 different rooms. So quite a significant system there. And then here we've got a project which, strictly speaking, is not supported by Biamp currently. I know we're looking into making this supported. So this is where the Touch 8i has an interface built in for its own use on its own touch panel, but then has a different interface which can be served to a separate touch panel, so a Touch 7, for example, in this case. Now, the reason this isn't supported currently is because you do need to do a small bit of extra programming inside the touch panel, because the Touch 8i serves its web interfaces up at a different port number. So by adding the IP address of the touch panel plus the port number, you can actually access these extra interfaces in here. So bear that in mind. That's quite a nice solution where you just need a controller for a few devices, but 2 control interfaces on touch panels. And then that is how that will appear inside your Project Designer software. All right, so I hope that was useful. The last thing we want to touch on here is the way that Biamp is getting in control of UC. So I think we're all very familiar with the way UC is going. So we have a UCC. In this case, it's a ThinkSmart device, which is taking care of the UC interface to the room and maybe the room equipment via a Tessera with parlay mics and ceiling speakers and so on. But you also need a control system in this room for lighting, display on and off, blinds, for example, maybe projector or display on and off as well. So in this case, it's a little bit cumbersome because we've got the touch panel for the UCC, but we've also got a separate touch panel for controlling these external devices. Now, what we've done is done an awful lot of work with integration. So what we now can do is we can take the user interface that we've got, in this case on a Touch 8i, but it could also be on a Touch 7, and we've moved it into the UCC. So Stephen, you've just asked the question, when are you going to get to the point of having UC control and room control on one panel? Hopefully this is the answer for you here. So what we've got here is the user interface for these external devices being controlled from the UC compute device via a Tango. So the way this works is in an MTR room, you've got the UCC control plugin, which you can download from Biamp. That tells the Teams interface to access the web app, which is inside the Tango. So when you then press the devices button inside the UC compute for Teams here, it opens up a page which is actually the web page inside the Tango. So here you've already programmed this inside your Tango. So this is exactly how it will look on a touch panel, but it's inside the Teams processor here. So you then have control of camera, display, lighting, shades, anything else that you've got programmed into your Tango will appear here. With Zoom rooms, it's a little more tricky, but easily possible. You do need to do a little bit of separate programming with a JSON file, which you then upload into the Zoom processor. But in Zoom, you go to the room controls, then you see the web interface that you've made inside your Tango will appear. So you've got, in this case, control of the TV, the volume, and everything off, for example. But that is all the interface from the Tango. So yes, Stephen, I'm glad you're happy about that. Happy selling of that new feature. So that's the end of our webinar today. I do apologize that we haven't been able to do a live presentation of this. I plan to do another run through where we go more deeply into the project designer software. So hopefully that will be useful, but keep an eye on that in the future. I'd like to thank you for attending today. I hope it's been useful for you. If you do have any outstanding questions, please get them into support@biamp.com, and either myself or one of my colleagues around the world will help you further. Please look at some resources we have at support.biamp.com. So there's an enormous amount of articles in there about all of the things we've spoken about today and more, because we've really just scratched the surface of what's possible on the interface, on the control system here. But yes, thank you very much for attending. I will leave you to your day wherever you are in the world. Hope you have a great one. And thanks again for attending. Speak to you again.